Good rising, brethren. This is Big Judah coming to you guys from California. Before I begin, give all praises to the Most High, Yahweh. Acknowledgement to the earthly mother. Who is wisdom? Who is the Holy Spirit? Acknowledgement to Yahweh Shai. I pray the Most High blesses this lesson this evening, gives more knowledge and understanding of the events of the past, in order to understand events that are currently happening on the earth. So we get a much better understanding of the things that are soon to come on the earth. A sister sent me a link to this video, and it has great information. It's going to show you the history of the church here in America. Now you have right now two types of these Christians. You have the ones that pretty much don't know anything and don't know the history of their church, don't know the racist foundation that has been set upon, and believes that prophecy is being played out. Like prophecy is all about the white evangelical church. Prophecy is all about their president. Prophecy is about Ish in the Middle East. And they've just forgotten about the true children of the Most High. Now, there's other Christians who've actually done research and found out the racist foundations that these churches have been set upon. They realize that there have been many horrible things done in their church's name. They realize that many things that their church has been set up on have been very hypocritical foundations. And that's what we're going to talk about this evening. And actually, I'm probably going to break up this video here into about 2 or 3 parts, just because there's so much information and the video is like almost an hour long, or a little bit over an hour long. So we're going to let them talk, let him explain some things, and then we're going to break it down like the Hebrews are supposed to. See, even when this guy's breaking this information down, he still misses the whole point of how what he's talking about is fulfilling biblical prophecy. That's where we come in. We make the connection to what he's saying to the scriptures, to history, to other books. When you get it all broken down together, then it all makes sense. And then it shows you how these churches have been trying to hide everything that they've done. So we would make those connections between biblical prophecy being fulfilled back in 1492 all the way up until today. Well, we're going to do that shortly. So like I said, we're going to get into some of the video today, part 1, and then I'll be adding to it. Either it's going to be 2 or 3 parts. I'm not sure exactly. But here we go.
Of history and this compelling research, the statistics, but it's also for you a bit of a memoir. Like, this is a personal undertaking for you. And so I want to start there. Why are you, a privileged white American Christian man, child of the Southern Baptist Convention denomination, why are you writing about the legacy of white supremacy in American Christianity? What does that mean for you right now?
Yeah. You said it is a personal book. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, as a Southern Baptist, and I was really involved. I was that kid who was at church 5 days a week. Every time it was open, I was there. I was active in the youth group. kind of in a leadership role. And then I went to a Southern Baptist college, and then I went to a Southern Baptist seminary. So I got a degree in a Master of Divinity degree from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I think part of this is a reckoning of my own in a way, and kind of putting down on the page a way of thinking through my own.
A reckoning of his own. And that's what's going on right now. And many Christians and Catholics and all different denominations thought they were never going to have to go through a reckoning. But this right now is a reckoning period with the Most High.
Evolution in my own journey on many of these issues. And so, to start with, I think one of the things that I realized certainly in writing this is how utterly invisible racism, white supremacy was rendered to me as a kid growing up, white and Christian in Mississippi. And that is true, even though I grew up, I remember I was in elementary school in the 1970s, for example, when the first African-American kids came to my all-white school. And that's a good 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education, of course, but Mississippi drug its feet for nearly 2 decades on finally getting around to integrate the public schools. And even though I was living through that moment, there was no reflection, no commentary at my church. I can't remember hearing a single sermon on civil rights, racial justice, what was even going on in our own schools right around us, why that was happening. There was no conversation whatsoever.
And that's how they are. When it's something that they don't want to talk about, they just ignore it. Just like what happened a couple of weeks ago at the Capitol. They don't want to talk about that. So no sermons, no nothing. But see, that's what white supremacy does. White supremacy makes it so they can control the narrative. If they don't want to talk about something, they just ignore it. See, we don't have that option when racism is in our lives every single day. So we don't have the option to just ignore all the racism that we're living in. But when you're white, you're not dealing with it because no one's being racist against you. That's why all of a sudden they got to make up something to show that they're being punished. They're losing their freedom because of an election. That's their big curse. Not getting their way in the election with Trump. And now people are going crazy. Women over here crying, praying to Trump to save them. Them storming the Capitol, looking to kill people, take people hostage. Why? Because they lost an election. When they don't get their way, that's their curse. That's their captivity. Losing their freedoms to do whatever the hell they want. Let's continue.
It wasn't until I was in my 20s in a seminary class that I even understood the origin of my own denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention, and that is that we were the denomination formed in 1845 explicitly over the issue of slavery, and the issue was that there was a rift between Northern and Southern Baptists over whether clergy could enslave other human beings and still be in good standing as Christian clergy. And the Northern Baptists rejected that view, and the many Southern Baptists in the South, who thought it was perfectly consistent to be not only Christian but a Christian leader and enslave other human beings because of the color of their skin. That was the normative view that was the founding principle of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1845. And I didn't know that until I was in my 20s. I mean, that history had been hidden even from those of us who were the most active in our own denomination. So between that sort of repressed history and then just absolutely no attention at all to systemic injustice, civil rights, or even like the role of white churches in resisting segregation of their own congregations and in resisting the desegregation of the schools, none of that was on the plate. And so I think this has been a long journey, a long evolution just in my own life. And I think the events of the last 5 years, or a little more even, the killing of Trayvon Martin.
Now he's talking about, social injustice and how these churches have nothing to do with it. They just ignore it altogether. There's your Proverbs 11:1. setting up a system, set up a society of unjust weights, which is an abomination to the Most High. And so you got a group of people here who are going to just ignore all these issues. That's exactly why the Most High is going to come and administer judgment. When the Most High says vengeance is mine, it's because these people and these groups have no sense of justice and no sense of equality. So that's exactly why the Most High is going to be the one to come and destroy these people. And see, it's one thing when one group of these Christians don't even acknowledge what's happening. This guy right here, he's going to acknowledge that there's an issue. But the next step is we can't trust these other nations to do the right thing. They're not going to do the right thing for our people. So that's exactly why the Most High separated us, has given us more knowledge and understanding so that we can pray to our power. Just like we were brought, just like in Exodus, when the Most High was wanting his people to be able to leave the Pharaoh and go out and pray to him. That's what he did. When the Most High shut down everything, he separated us, and now he's opened it up for us to be able to worship him, follow our Father, learn his ways, learn our history. Let me continue.
Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, this kind of just litany of things. Dylan Roof killing 9 African Americans in Charleston, and who was a self-professed Christian, right? We should be calling him a white Christian terrorist, but that's not language that really got used around him. And I think this amnesia, this kind of myopic view of white Christianity's role is I think a story that I needed to tell for myself. And I think that we need to tell for the sake of the health of not only the faith, but the country.
Mm-hmm. We talk about origins, and you talked about the origin even of the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm wondering, because I've always thought that Christianity, white Christianity in the United States, really learned how to be as violent as possible from its experience with Native Americans. And I wonder if you are looking at really sort of the birth defect of America and the real problem with American Christianity, why not start with an examination of the subjugation of indigenous peoples?
Mm-hmm.
Why begin with black, white?
Well, I think it has to do partly with the book being written as a memoir, right? And that this was really primarily my experience. So I really tried to ground the examples that I used in things that were connected, to me, sort of my experience. When I do talk about though the deeper history of my own family, though, back in Middle Georgia, so my both sides of my family actually.
This is very important. How he breaks down, his family, and you're gonna wonder why whites in society have such a leg up on our people. We've talked about it, but he's going to explain it. He's going to admit to certain things, and you realize how, it fits Deuteronomy 28 and the curses. How we had our lands taken from us, given to another, and then we were enslaved and forced to work on those lands, which were ours originally. And there's going to be a couple other things he's going to admit here as well.
Go back 6 generations, back to the early 1800s in Georgia. And when at the end of the book, I kind of say, look, we all need to learn how to tell truer stories, like about ourselves and how we got here, truer stories about our family. When I tell my family's story there, it does begin with the kind of best documentation I have, with the arrival of my ancestors, again, both sides of my family, sometime around the turn of the 1800s, and they're arriving on land that has been forcibly cleared of its original Native American inhabitants, right? And they're, we often use these words like pioneers and, those kinds of things, white settlers and these kinds.
And that's it. The words are very important. Pioneers, white settlers, but they never talk about the fact that they forced the Aborigines off of their lands, forcibly took it and gave it to someone else. Just like welfare. And they have the nerve to complain when sometimes our people are in need and the government has to give them something to sustain themselves after they've taken absolutely everything.
Kinds of language, but I mean, they were inheriting, they got a 200-acre plot of land that was carved up in a nice, neat little square, but that had been after, widespread Native American removals, that they then made that land available to people like my 6th great-grandfather who had served in the Revolutionary War. That's what.
Okay, so 200 acres. We couldn't even get 40 acres and a mule after all of our service. But these people were just given 200 acres for just showing up. See, this is the history. This guy's bringing out a lot of history and a lot of information. That's why I want to do a couple of parts. Because like I said, he's in the middle. Most of the people that go to those churches have no idea or don't want to admit to the fact of all the heinous and horrible things that their forefathers did in order to get the lands, get the resources, get the slaves, and everything else. This guy's admitting it, but he's not going to equate it to the scriptures. The things that were done to, that he's talking about, the taking away of the land, forcibly removing our people off the lands, that was all part of the curses of Deuteronomy 28. If you want to know more, read from 15 to 68. And you're going to see many of the curses that you're hearing about, what this guy's talking about. That was because the Most High put the curses on us and put the blessings on these other nations. So the blessing was to be able to take our land. And that's exactly what they did. Move us off of our land. We had no power. Take our land and force us to be slaves on it. We had no power. Break up our families. Sell our wives off. Sell our children off. Sell the husbands off. To never be able to see their kids again. That's what they've done. But that was all part of the scriptures. But they're not talking about that. Like I said, they're going to admit information, but it's up to us to actually, connect it to the scriptures. Let's keep on going.
What he got as kind of part of his benefits was Native American land in Georgia that he was able to. So I mean, that story is certainly there. I mean, the other, I think, piece of this is that white Christianity doesn't invent this sense of white supremacy when it lands on the shores of the U.S. It goes much, much, much further back than that. You can go back as far as the 15th century, even prior to the Protestant Reformation, with the doctrine of discovery, which is 1493, which we have a papal edict that says if white European missionaries and explorers show up on other lands that are occupied by people who do not practice the Christian faith, they can forcibly take those lands and consider that to be condoned by the church and by God. And so this was 1493, right? This was the beginning of our tribulation right here.
He's giving you the justification by papal edict that they could go around, take your land, and if you weren't a white Christian, you had nothing to say about it. You see that? And see, this is what they hide, that this was all part of biblical prophecy. In fact, let's read it really quick. This is all the things in the scriptures that they say is supposed to happen in the future after they get raptured away for doing all this dirt. Let's see here. Go ahead and go to the book of Revelation. Chapter 6, verse 8. This is what he's talking about right here. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. That was fulfilled right here in 1492, 93, with these edicts to come and take over our lands. Something else I want to read is from a book I've done videos on a long time ago called Dogs of the Conquest by Varner and Varner. It's called Dogs of the Conquest. At the beginning, around page 4, it was talking about what the priests were doing because they were the ones who were setting up the ships that were coming on, I think, on the second voyage, and what they were preparing them for. They were not preparing them just to come over here and spread their Christianity. They're preparing them for what this guy was just admitting to right here. It says, in the Indies, Columbus had found a kind of Eden whose natives seemed to bend willingly to Spanish domination. Thus, he, in all probability, did not contemplate bringing dogs with him, even on his second voyage. The supplies and equipment of the fleet, however, were left by the sovereigns to the discretion of their personal chaplain, the shrewd Archdeacon of Seville, Juan Rodriguez de Fonseca. This prelate's perception of the true purpose of the venture and his knowledge of the Spanish character made him keenly aware that the Renaissance crusaders would find dogs indispensable in a pagan world. So they were calling our world over here in the Americas the pagan world, even though they're the ones that were the pagans, the ones, the priests of Mahan. Says the monarchs specified a kind of loving treatment of the Indians on Columbus's second voyage and their speedy conversion to Christianity. At the same time, however, they stressed the settlement of the land, the organization of trade centers, and a careful garnering of material resources. Fonseca was aware that to carry out the second capitulation successfully, some compromise had to be made between desire for material gain and evangelical piety. Such profits as the crown expected, he knew, would have to be obtained eventually by means of enforced labor and human bondage. He surmised that though the Indians might be as specific as Columbus had described them, they would not adjust to manual labor without coercion. In consequence, he made certain that when Columbus's splendid fleet sailed in September 1493, it was adequately equipped with men, arms, and a pack of 20 purebred mastiffs and greyhounds. These dogs and the others that followed were to lay a bloody trail across the islands and mainland of the newfound world. So that's what they were coming over here for. To kill, steal, rape, rob, murder. Because they already had an edict that said they could do pretty much any, if they weren't white Christians, you could take and do whatever you wanted to with them. And as you read that book, you totally see that's exactly what they did.
Like way back. And so the doctrine of manifest destiny, this sense of kind of entitlement, and that it's not just sort of that is divinely ordained, right? It really is seen to be the will of God, right? That this is the role of white Europeans in the world, is to quote unquote civilize others and to see themselves at the top of the racial hierarchy. It's all the way back. So it's built in even as white Christians, land on the shores of the early colonies here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So how?
And we're going to stop part 1 right here.